Partisan, the show where we give you opinions that you can't get anywhere else. My name's Adam. This is Fred.
Hi, how are you doing? Today we're going to talk about several topics. First topic is going to be Hillary Clinton's poll numbers recently dropped. We're also going to talk about local Macon news, about a recent YouTube video released by Aleris concerning their drone operations.
We're also going to talk about guns. We're going to talk about the Oregon shooting, and me and Fred are going to battle it out on some gun issues. We're also going to talk about the House Speaker and everything that's going on with what's going on in Congress right now.
We're also going to touch on the recent Russian missiles landing in Iran, and talking also about the drone strike on Doctors Without Borders, and tying those two together. And
if we have time,
that might get pushed in next week because we got a lot to talk about.
We're going to talk about Stephen Hawking and what he said about capitalism and automating the way that we do business here in America. So, Fred, go ahead first with start us off on Clinton.
There was a recent Reuters Ipsos poll which has Clinton down another 10 points. Clinton has recently been falling in the polls.
Feel the burn.
Yeah, feel the burn. Bernie Sanders has picked up 4 points, and Joe Biden, who's not even in the race yet, has picked up 4 points in the polls.
That really ticks me off. It really does when I see Joe Biden's numbers up there and he hasn't even entered yet. Because it gives us this illusion that one candidate or the other isn't doing as well. Are you getting that same?
Yeah, and I think that it also, polling with Biden at this point is difficult because one of the issues that you run into is that he may not even run. So it doesn't even give you the impression of how A, Clinton is doing, and B, how other candidates other than Clinton are doing.
I'm with you. Like, it would be more accurate to show us numbers for, say, Larry Lessig.
Right.
Isn't well known at all.
No,
but
he's not.
He needs to be put out there. We need to have more equal time for all of these candidates. And I include the Republican candidates on there. I mean, we got John Kasich, who I think is a very reasonable guy on the Republican side, who I'm just not hearing enough from. I don't even know who he is.
Right. John Kasich is the current governor of Ohio, and he's not a political outsider. He was, I think, a 9-term U.S. congressman, took some time off, went into the private sector, came back, is now in his 2nd term as Ohio governor. So this is not a guy who's outside the mainstream. I think, though, what everything is showing in general is a distrust for those that are considered career or mainstream politicians.
I definitely see it at least on the right side.
Yeah.
Because on the left side we have Clinton, who is a career politician,
right,
and Bernie Sanders, who, even though he doesn't act like one, he has definitely been in politics
for a very long time.
All of his life.
Right. And trying to make that association between the right and the left, or at least between Democrat and Republican, is a bit deceptive because even though Clinton's poll numbers have dropped 10 points, she's still, what is it? She went from 51 to 41% by herself with 2 other big candidates. Bernie in that poll was at 28%, and Biden is 20%.
And how much of that drop do you think is because of all this House Speaker news?
I think that there is some of it, definitely.
There was a story that came out, I want to say this morning, retired major from the Air Force was just fired from that Benghazi committee.
Mm-hmm.
And he came out and said that they were that the people on the committee were targeting Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
And then they came right back and said he was targeting Obama's administration.
Right.
So we have a drop in the poll for Hillary, which sort of shows that when McCarthy came out...
Kevin McCarthy,
yeah,
right.
He was definitely hinting at some sort of truth behind the fourth wall, tearing that down a little bit.
I think so. And I think that I want to see how, because polls, there's a lag in polls. I really want to see, once this news gets out, because it was a pretty big blow. And we're going to talk more about the House Speaker in a little bit, the House Speaker race in a little bit. But I really want to see what the polls reflect once that gets more traction with people. And they're like, oh, so the Benghazi thing wasn't what we thought it was. The problem is that Clinton, it's not her only issue. She also has this email issue, which she can't seem to shake.
And there's so many bigger hits to throw at her. The Wall Street's a big deal with her. That's huge. New York, the way that they... we're talking about limiting soft drinks. We're talking about all the things that she was a part of. You know, bigger government and more regulations when she was working in New York. Mm-hmm. And those things are real. Those things are factual and tenable, and we're just ignoring those and jumping on emails which may or may not give any ammunition.
Well, you know, Obama has a similar deal where there are things to talk about Barack Obama where you can disagree with him. Oh. Even if you're on the left, there are things that the right and the left could be talking about. But what do they talk about? They talk about he's a Marxist. They talk about his birth certificate. They talk about he's a Muslim. Yeah. They talk about how he just can't wait to take away guns. He can't. No. He's taken 7 years and he hasn't done a thing about it yet.
He didn't close down Guantanamo Bay.
Right. He didn't.
I mean,
and now
I think there's war crimes. We're talking war crimes.
Now I think that there are issues there that he couldn't get into, but we're going to talk about one big thing. If we get to it later on, the Doctors Without Borders deal, I think that drone strikes...
Big mishap.
And I think that drone strikes are a thing that people could talk about with him. I think that especially targeting U.S. citizens overseas is the thing that they could talk about with him. There are many things you could talk about with him, but the things that they want to talk about the Affordable Care Act. They want to talk about...
a bunch of non-issues. They want to talk about the empty chair.
Right.
They want to talk about the empty chair.
The empty chair at the RNC. Exactly, where Clint Eastwood talked. Exactly. They want to talk about that. And, yeah, and I think Clinton has a similar issue where there are real substantive issues that you could talk about, but everybody wants to talk about all these non-issues.
It's being clouded by stuff that's not verifiable today.
And then people get mad when the voters vote without having a lot of information.
I know.
They make them
low information voters.
Right, the low information voter. You know what? You're not giving them any information.
Yeah. They're only low information because you're giving them bad information.
Now, I will say that Sanders, all of this is coming from the right. Well, most of it's coming from the Republican side. Sanders himself has prided himself on running
he's been playing clean.
A non-dirty, non-negative campaign. Not all Sanders supporters are doing that.
He came out and said no super PACs. He does not want a super PAC.
Right. But he can't control what his supporters do. But there are his supporters who go on there and just blast Clinton. She's so dirty. She's so this. She's so that.
Well, what's silly is they don't even have to because the Republicans are doing that for him right now. He doesn't have to play a dirty campaign.
Right.
Because the Republicans are doing that job for him. And they're blasting themselves.
Exactly. I agree. I agree completely on that. That he can basically ride the wave of whatever they're going to do and just kind of ride that up.
Yeah, and he can get dirty later.
I think that next time we talk, we should highlight we should probably highlight what's going on the Republicans. We talk to the Democrats a lot more, but I definitely at some point want to talk about what's going on with Sanders in the primary states because there is something there.
He's fired up there. He's doing a really good job. I mean, but he came out swinging with his own ideas.
Right.
And much like the way Trump connects with people by saying he's going to be the best at building the best stuff.
The classiest, the biggest, the most spectacular.
Bernie Sanders is coming out and saying what everybody's actually thinking and saying what we actually, and for the populist. Mm-hmm. You know, he's talking about the issues that really matter to us and not building the biggest, best wall.
Right. Right. I do think that there is something there, and I think that we definitely are going to hit that up at some point. Our next story has to do with the drone company Aleris. This is more of a local story.
This is nuts.
But yeah, it's very, very interesting. Aleris, back in July, had tried to get a letter of understanding with the city of Macon that if they buy $5.7 million worth of drones, then Aleris would make Macon their southeast hub for manufacturing and production, with the idea that they would bring in jobs and other kinds of benefits.
And they were meeting with the mayor.
Correct, for several months before then.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that there's been a lot made of that. That's not that uncommon, having quiet, secret meetings with businesses.
That's secret meetings makes it
sound
yeah.
sinister, when in fact that happens all
Yeah.
the time.
And it's a good thing. I'm sure Kumho Tires had secret meetings
They
with the
absolutely
mayor.
did. Mr. Pickle
Yeah.
had secret meetings all the time, and that happens all the time because they don't want to make something a story before it's a story.
And now we're going to get jobs at Kumho Tires thanks to those
right
dubious secret meetings.
right. So there's been a lot made of that, but when that came out, they had a vote, and it was voted out of committee to go to the full committee to go ahead and do the letter of understanding.
It passed the first vote. They got past the first step of being approved.
Right, which was in the subcommittee, and then they brought it to the full commission. And that's when it hit the media, and suddenly people were like, whoa, wait, $5.7 million for drones? What are you talking about? And the commissioners suddenly, some of them switched their votes. Most of them had not had a chance to vote, and they voted against it. I think it was 5-3. Commissioner Al Tillman was not there to vote, but it was a 5-3 vote, so it wasn't the entire 9-commission vote.
Now, before we talk about this, what do you think about Aleris coming to Macon, opening up these jobs, and producing drones?
I am a big technophile. I love new technology. I actually like the idea of Macon becoming, I actually want Macon to become more tech savvy, with more internet jobs, more high-tech jobs.
Bring us some fiber.
Right. I think that's a great idea. Fiber internet would be fantastic. Cities that have gotten that have suddenly just blossomed. Aleris, though, is a startup. And they've made a lot of promises, and there's not a lot of detail on how they will deliver.
You're right.
And I think that we're just very low on details. That's what makes me wary about them. Like, they say they have $50 million of drone orders in the pipeline. They've just got to create the manufacturing. But they've got to GoFundMe. I think it is a GoFundMe.
I'm not sure. I went to their website
Uh-huh.
and I looked for a careers page, because the big thing about this coming here is jobs.
Right.
It's jobs, jobs, jobs. And that's what they're trying to sell, but they don't even have a career section on their webpage. And that is a big red X for me. Now, is it a big deal to make a new, addition to your webpage as a career section? No, but to sell me on jobs and not already have it set up doesn't look good to me.
Right. So, Adam, you actually found they actually put up.
They put up a video, and even though I was 50-50 prior to watching the video, because I say, hey, pro jobs, I'm a little bit anti-drone. Mm-hmm. I'm a little bit anti-drone. As much as I love technology also, having drones flying around all over the place freaks me out a little bit. Mm-hmm. But they put out a video, and they put the commissioners here in Macon on blast.
Yeah.
And it seemed rude. It seemed like an attack. It looks like a political ad. We're going to put the link down here, I think.
We're going to put the link in the annotation. Yeah.
But it looks like a political attack ad more than anything else.
It really does. And they really are like, find out how your commissioners are going to vote on this, and if they vote on this, you need to vote against them.
But it has 10,000 views on YouTube. It has 10,000 views already. That's crazy, considering it's tough to find.
Right.
It's a tough to find video. I found it through local paper had posted it here. So it's got 10,000 views, and they say a click like if you support Aleris and Macon, and the latest numbers
21 like clicks, 35 down clicks.
So I'm not the only one that thinks this is a little shady.
Right. It's a little more down than up, but that is obviously not a representative view of those who have viewed it.
And we don't know if those people are from Macon. We don't know if they're international and they just ran across it.
The thing that concerns me the most is that their comments are disabled.
That concerns me also.
Because I have no idea who these likes are from. I have no idea who these dislikes are from.
And they don't want to hear the feedback. That's a little crazy.
Do you like it? Yes or no?
Yeah.
I don't want. Why do you like it? What do you think that we're doing?
And they don't want any dissension here, because I think if they had the comments open, it's possible for one of those commissioners to leave a comment and say, look, I'm the commissioner, and these are the reasons why I voted it down, and your video is slanderous.
Right.
But I don't know. I don't know if that's the case, because they haven't allowed any different opinions on this.
I mean, comment sections on YouTube can be crazy. They can be crazy, but you can also moderate that to some degree.
I think they are crazy. I think no matter what, they're crazy.
I've seen some that aren't, but for the most part, they do have. They are troll infested areas.
If you like Nazis, YouTube comment sections. You will learn a whole lot about Nazis,
or what they think about Nazis, or how they think they're related to Nazis. Yeah. But in general, I just trust YouTube videos that disable comments, because I like to read the comment sections.
I do. I'll go through them. The first couple can be helpful.
Sure. They
can be helpful. Sort of like Reddit.
Right.
The Reddit comments. The first couple are helpful, but once you start going to the rabbit's hole. Yeah. All right, next up on our list, got to talk about the Oregon shooting. We got to talk about guns, Fred.
Yeah.
And this is an issue where me and you don't always see eye to eye. I am a strong believer in the modified Second Amendment. And I have to say the modified Second Amendment because, 2008, the Supreme Court did rule.
Right.
And they basically took the words, a regulated militia, out of it. And they said, other than this small group of exceptions, felons, mental issues, everybody gets a gun. Right.
They, for probably 100 years, and commenters fact check me on this, there had been an understanding that the Second Amendment was a corporate right to bear arms, that the nation as a whole had the right to bear arms, and that the individual right could be curtailed. And it was written for totally different reasons. It was really written for slavery. Right. It was. It was. And now it's been interpreted to mean that this is the ability to protect yourself, home defense, and defense against the government, which in this day and age, it's silly. I did have a friend point out one thing, and it's a little morbid. And he said, and I'm going to try to get his words as exact as possible. You only need one bullet to end tyranny. I mean, and he went on and talked about it further, and basically, what he laid out was, if you're under a government that's going to torture you, that's going to do a whole bunch of heinous things to you, you're never going to be able to fight a government's army, even if it's your own government's army. Right. Well, the only way to escape torture, the only way to escape FEMA camps or whatever, you think's going to happen, is to put yourself down. It's, I guess it would be like a zombie dilemma. Right. You got bit by a zombie, you put yourself down. Right. And as morbid as it sounds, I never think we'll get there in America. Right. Like that's a weird dystopian fantasy, but there is sort of a point to that. I really had to agree with him. And I don't disagree, but obviously there are other ways to end yourself other than a bullet. Right. If you really wanted to commit suicide. And viewers out there, we're not advocating suicide. I'm pro death. I will say that I am pro assisted suicide, doctor assisted suicide for those who really do terminal cases, who really do off book suffer more. California just passed assisted suicide. They approved of it. Jack Kevorkian before his time. Okay. I want to say it was this week sometime. But back to the shooting. Yeah, back to the shooting. There was an article that you brought up
Yep.
that talked about that compared Obama's statement about this type of violence does not happen in other developed countries.
And it's true. It's true. I mean, they have happened. But you saw in Australia, it happened, and Australia, they don't have a Second Amendment. They don't have a Supreme Court that said everybody gets a gun. So they basically schwacked everybody and said, we're taking your guns, and you're not going to have any. And since then, there hasn't been any of these so-called mass shootings.
Mm-hmm.
You don't really see it anywhere else. Was it Sweden?
Yeah.
Or Denmark. It happened recently. There's a crazy guy that got his hands on a whole bunch of guns and shot a whole bunch of people. But you don't see them at the same magnitude as you see them here in the States. And this is one where a place where we'll agree is we have to do something.
Right. We got to do something.
We have to do something. Now, I do think we're limited in what we can do, and you think that my limitations can be voided a little bit. We can do more gun control stuff.
I do think we can do more gun control stuff.
What are your recommendations?
See, it's kind of hard to say what my recommendations are because
we know what works. We can look at these other countries that stopped the shootings, and we can say that worked, but those other countries also have other things in place.
Right.
Like if you look at Australia, they have healthcare.
Right.
They have a healthcare for all system. So maybe, and I wrote, I think you saw what I had wrote. I wrote down three things we could do.
Mm-hmm.
And none of them touch guns.
Mm-hmm.
One of them was to end foreign wars, demilitarize our police, because we do have a culture of violence here in America.
I agree with that.
Well, I mean, we definitely do, and you can see it. I wrote in the post that art imitates reality. Art imitates life.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people don't necessarily think of art in the broad aspect of, say, video games. A lot of people like to blame video games.
Right.
But a video game is really just a whole bunch of artists and programmers coming together to build. It's basically a movie that you play.
Right.
You know, and a movie is art. And we have movies that are filled with war, video games that are filled with war.
And I think that that's putting the cart before the horse to say these things cause violence. I would say that violence causes these things.
Because those are art forms. Art imitates reality. The reality is we're still in the longest war in American history right now. You know, America since its inception has been at war about every 50 years, give or take. We're a war-based country.
We are.
So, you know, if we get rid of this culture of war, I think we can decrease the way that art translates that.
Yeah.
And maybe we won't have so many movies about war if we don't have because we have a lot of input for that.
And that's possible.
You know, I also said in the war on drugs.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these guns, especially the ones that are pro-gun or worried about, are the guns that criminals currently have. One of the things that taking the guns away really hurts is, in Australia, I don't know how many guns existed in Australia.
Mm-hmm.
How many guns do we have in America?
It's an astronomical number.
Yeah,
it's hundreds of millions.
Yeah, like it's so many.
And that's kind of the problem where if you're talking about gun control, the reason why I don't know what to do is we don't study it. Congress has actually severely limited what the CDC can do.
The CDC is sort of banned from even looking.
Right, from even looking at it as a disease, despite the fact that the CDC looks at car fatalities, they look at various other things that aren't necessarily disease, but that are health related. And if we're not looking at that, I have no idea what really is drilled down root cause. But there's that, and then there's just the actual number of guns.
It would be similar to deporting all illegal immigrants.
Right.
Like it would be an astronomical effort and cost a lot of money to even think about collecting these guns or develop a plan because I saw the number and I forgot what it was, but I'm thinking it's somewhere around every American can own 3 guns.
Yeah. And
there would still be a pile of them.
Right. I was talking with a local politician. I'm not going to say who it was because it was kind of a private conversation. I don't know if he wants his opinion out, but he and I were just chewing the fat about gun control. And his opinion was kind of the horse is out of the barn with that. That gun control won't work because we're too far gone. We can't control the guns. And really, the only way...
270 million.
Okay, that sounds right.
Possessed by civilians.
Or that sounds like the correct number, not that that's a right...
And 897,000 carried by police. 20% of gun owners own 65% of the guns.
Right.
That's just... It's astronomical amount of guns that we have here. And the second we start collecting... The worry is that the criminals will keep their guns.
Sure. I do think that locally you can explore voluntary buyback programs. I think that those work on a local level.
They do.
Because they are voluntary and they are a way in which people can collect up their own guns and return them.
And it's a way that we can dispose of them so they don't end up back on the black market.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the biggest issue. So... Really, for me, looking at a thing locally instead of nationally is right now the only way we can do it. A federal top-down kind of solution just won't, despite the fact that would be the most effective, won't happen.
It'll have the most blowback.
And it probably won't work because the criminals will hoard their guns.
I don't think... At this moment, there's a way to end, and don't even call them mass shootings, to end mass killings. I think that there is a connection between a lot of these killers. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest connection is I think they're suicidal at first. I think that's the first thing is that they have mental instability and they are suicidal. And I think that they're also social outcasts. So with those suicidal tendencies, they also take that social awkwardness and that outcast attitude and then they lash out. And they lash out and kill as many people as possible, knowing that they're going to be either killed by the police or they're going to take their own lives.
Now, I will say that, I just want to wrap up by saying that I don't want to cast aspersion on all people with mental health, because in general, people with mental health issues are actually less violent than those without. That being said, those who have committed these shootings seem to have a particular mental disorder that... If diagnosed early with...
And that's why I said the third thing that I said to reduce these shootings was a universal health care program.
Right.
For everybody. I'm not talking about the Affordable Care Act, which, yes, 40 million people got health care off of it. Mm-hmm. But there's still millions. There's tens of millions of people that didn't get health care. So let's talk about a better health care system with a budget for mental health.
Yeah, I agree on that last.
So there is some good news out there for people who are impartial when it comes to politics.
About time.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. So go and let us know about the ExportImport Bank and why it doesn't even matter.
Okay. Well, the ExportImport Bank, or XM, is a organization that essentially helps businesses get financing for overseas ventures, for exporting and importing. And they use that money to field ventures which generate jobs. It is a government-sponsored and supported...
Wait, this sounds like good news. This sounds like it's something that does matter.
Right. It is something that matters. It's something that people don't know a lot about. It's a very inside baseball kind of political thing. Republicans, this is something that's been a bipartisan supported thing for many years. Recently, though, Republicans made it a huge, or some on the Republican side made it a huge thing they wanted to get rid of. And when the next vote came up for it, funding for it was voted down, and it essentially stopped operation from the far right side on the Republican Party, who has been controlling for a long time what goes on in the House of Representatives.
I guess that also means that choosing the next majority leader or the next Speaker of the House is crucial in making sure that this actually hits the floor for a vote.
Right, exactly. And what is interesting is that with the tumult in the House currently, and if you don't know, Speaker John Boehner, Republican from Ohio, has recently he's not only resigned his speakership, he's resigned from Congress, and he's basically given them until the end of October to find a new speaker. And the next person in line for that was Kevin McCarthy, who was the House Majority Leader, basically the number 2 in the House, number 2 Republican. He's from California.
We talked about him earlier.
Right, we mentioned him earlier, but I did want to get a little more into that. And he was the front runner behind 2 other candidates. And when they were about to vote, in a very stunning move, he took himself out of the running and said, I'll just remain House Majority Leader. I don't want to be Speaker.
Yeah, he said he couldn't get the 247.
Right. He could get enough to win. He wanted enough for a mandate and to bring the Republican Party together, is what he said. And he couldn't get that because there's about 28.
Was it 180 was the number he could get, I think?
220, I want to say.
220? Okay.
It was something like that. Fact check us in the comments. Yeah. We're totally just off the cuff on this. But he said he took himself out of the running, and John Boehner postponed the election. So while all of that is going on, moderate Republicans actually teamed up with Democrats to get another vote on the Export-Import Bank. And they're using something called a discharge petition.
Okay, what's a discharge petition?
Basically, it is a procedural. It is a procedural motion that bypasses committees and leadership to directly call for legislation. Basically, it's like an executive order. It just kind of. Yeah. It's something from the body itself, where someone puts forward this discharge petition, and then they all vote on it, and they all say, we want this no matter what committees or leadership wants. We, as the House,
it sounds like they should be doing more of these.
They should, if they want to get through. And Democrats have been trying to get with moderate Republicans for some time to get discharge petitions on several things. It's a very rarely used procedural motion. It's very rarely used. And the idea that it has been used is very striking, because that is a break of moderates with both party leadership and with their extreme wing, who has been kind of running things.
And moderates have been hard to find in the Republican Party. They've been very hard to find.
Right. Well,
and it's partially the fault of news networks, because the more extreme you are, the better you are for ratings. Yeah. So you're not going to be invited on if you're one of these guys that's supporting this export-import bank deal. They're not going to bring you on and talk to you because you make sense.
Right. Yeah. And this is something that is not going to get a lot of traction with the voter in general, because they don't really know what the Export-Import Bank is.
Again, low information. Like, I didn't even know until you sent me the story, and even then I'm kind of like, I'm not really sure what they're talking about. And so,
but it is getting a huge amount of traction with the leadership. And I want to say that, let me see if I can find the chair of the committee in which that legislation is stalled in. It's the Financial Services Committee, Jeb Hensarling. He has come out and blasted. It's about 50 GOP congressmen who joined, moderate GOP congressmen who sided with the Democrats. He came out and he blasted them.
That's still a very small amount. Out of 247, that's still a very small amount.
It is. That's right. It is. It's a small amount who would, come over and say, hey, let's
do the right thing for jobs and for growth.
Right. And what the conservative wing has been saying is essentially this is government spending, this is picking winners and losers in the economy, and the government should not be involved in economic matters whatsoever.
It did look like in the story you sent me that it would benefit companies like Boeing and GE a little bit more than the smaller guys.
And it will.
But benefiting Boeing and GE does benefit anybody that works for Boeing and GE or anybody that wants a job with Boeing and GE. Boeing and GE jobs are good jobs.
Right. It will, and there are definitely real pluses and minuses to its use. I mean, I always am afraid of the consolidation of capital into smaller and smaller numbers of hands. But at some point, we have to say, are we going to stand on principle and starve for jobs, or can we find some compromise between those two things and maybe find jobs, get jobs using this mechanism, and then find other ways to cut out the so much of the government picking winners and losers.
And there's a bigger transition that we're going to have to make. Talked about Stephen Hawking at the beginning, and about how everything's becoming automated.
Right.
I mean, we're not so far from a time where if you want to go to a McDonald's, you pull up to a small tablet and you order your food on a tablet, and it comes out on a conveyor belt.
Right.
Like, we're not far from these small food chains or big food chains not even needing an employee, maybe a manager and a technician.
And that's it. Right. Right now, McDonald's has the create your own, and you can walk up to a touchscreen kiosk and essentially order, and right now someone brings it to you.
Yeah.
So it hasn't cut down on their jobs right now, but that's not that far off if that catches on.
Yeah. Walmart has the self-checkout lanes. So you have one person watching 4 lanes instead of one per checkout lane. So you can see a drastic reduction in these jobs. Now, the article that we were looking at was a little bit misleading in the title. The title was Stephen Hawking Says We Should Be More Frightened of Capitalism Than Robots.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think Stephen Hawking actually said that at all in the article.
No, he really didn't.
I think he was saying be wary of both.
Yeah, and we're going to get into that in a minute. But I think that was very misleading. I think that was kind of sensational, clickbait, and then when you
worked, I clicked.
Right, yeah, I said it to me. I was like, "Oh, is Stephen Hawking a socialist now? Okay, let's check this out."
At least it didn't say, and the next thing he did was unbelievable.
Three simple things Stephen Hawking said against capitalism.
You won't believe it. Yeah,
right.
Click. So I think we're going to have to scale down a little bit and talk about a little bit more disaster before we actually talk about the Stephen Hawking thing.
Yeah, one more bit of bad news, and then we'll catch up on that article.
Yeah. All right. So for the down section, we got to talk about a little bit of war.
Yeah.
And a story came out.
We're still at war, people.
Yeah. A story came out. I guess Vladimir Putin gave us the business at the UN,
right,
and decided that he was going to jump on board the war bandwagon in Syria, and they had launched a lot of cruise missiles, and 2 of them landed in Iran.
Yes. Now, as of this filming, I think that neither Russia nor Iran nor Tehran have confirmed that.
A media source in Iran actually said it was American propaganda.
Yes.
But, I mean, we're watching.
Right, obviously. So they have not confirmed that yet, but sources are saying that their cruise missiles, basically Russia has ships in the Caspian Sea.
Yep.
And they are firing cruise missiles from the Caspian Sea over Iran, over Iraq, to Syria, to hit targets in Syria. Now, if the United States does something like this, we're old hats at firing cruise missiles.
Yep.
We've been doing this almost as long as I've been alive.
And that's what the article said. It's basically said that Russia, you haven't been firing these missiles. Leave that to the guys that fire the missiles.
Right, leave that. Yeah. Let the experts handle that.
And
amateurs.
then we hit the MSF, which sort of proves we're not the experts.
Not that we think we are. And MSF is Doctors Without Borders. That's the initials in its French pronunciation. And we had a drone strike that actually...
This is devastating to me.
Yeah.
This you cannot ask for a more group of selfless individuals than doctors. Doctors that could be doctors here in the U.S. or in there, because they're not just U.S. doctors, they're doctors from everywhere else.
Yeah.
That could be doctors making doctor salaries at nice hospitals in their home countries.
Far from war, far from
and
suffering.
Instead, they volunteer to not collect that salary, to not have a practice,
Right.
and to go to devastated areas and to give their time for very little, living in tents, eating MREs. Like they get nothing, and they just give. I mean, these are the most selfless people I could think of, and then we bomb them. We bomb them for an hour and a half.
Yeah,
and
I think so.
And 30 of those minutes, I mean, MSF tells the Pentagon where they're located, so it's not like we didn't know.
Right.
And even once the bombing started, they still bombed for 30 minutes after Doctors Without Borders was like, hey, stop bombing us. And apparently no other buildings were messed with. It was just that one hospital. And I have a lot of issues with this. There is a law of armed conflict, and shooting up a hospital, shooting a medic, shooting a medevac helicopter, that is a war crime. And we need a big investigation on this. I mean, I honestly think this is much bigger than what the Republicans think Benghazi was. This is a big deal, and we have done something horrendous. And it's going to be more than just an apology from the president. We need to really look at war now. You know, with this and the missiles that the missiles that accidentally got dropped in Iran, it proves that too many mistakes happen.
Right.
When we're constantly at war.
Right. We're fighting in very sensitive areas that are trying to now still find their own way in the 21st century. And while we do need to maintain our interests, fighting wars in those areas,
it doesn't work. We've been doing it for 15 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't work. And Desert Storm was, 10 years before that? So, we've been involved too much. You know, and 20 years before Desert Storm, we were messing with the Ayatollah and Iran. We've become too entangled over there, and we're creating more enemies than allies. And, I mean, I guess that's a big part of why terrorism even exists in the Western world, is because we keep creating enemies. We keep bombing places that are good. Like, MSF is obviously a good organization.
Now, I'm not gonna try and victim blame on terrorism and say that we caused the terrorists, but I will say that I took Osama bin Laden at his word when he said that one of the reasons why he did 9/11 was because why he did his operation on the USS Cole was because we have bases in Saudi Arabia and we have bases near their holy lands. Now, that might be just as excuse to blow up this thing that he truly hates to begin with, but at some point you got to ask somebody, okay, why did you do this thing? And part of it is it's my religion. Part of it is,
I mean, you can't take the geopolitical out of it every single time.
Right.
I think that it's an intertwined culture, and it is geopolitical. It is religious. It is being in a third world country. These countries aren't nice to live in. You know, and if you're one of the minorities over there, and whether you're a minority because of your nationality or because you're Sunni or Shia in the opposite governed country, you don't have a voice. You are oppressed, and that's going to create movements that aren't always going to side with American politics.
Right. And even we've tried to spawn democracy, and
they don't want it.
Not only do they not want it, but elections have consequences. And when we spurred democracy in Palestine, they voted in Hamas.
Yeah, or Egypt.
Right.
The Muslim Brotherhood came in.
Right.
I think, you know, when we're talking about these bombs hitting these targets that they weren't intended to hit, I think we can go a little bit bigger and say that our efforts don't always hit the direction we want them to hit either.
I think that's an apt statement.
Yeah.
I would say that this is a very complex issue.
It is.
And like you said, it's very entwined. maybe constantly having military presence there won't solve the issue. Maybe removing that won't solve the issue, but maybe we could just stop being a thread in that tangle.
Exactly. Just for a little while.
Just for a little while, maybe.
Just for a little while. Let them figure things out. Because Syria is a civil war.
Yes.
And it was just a couple of years ago where the chemical bomb happened, where they had the chemical attack. I don't think we ever figured out who even did that. One side blamed the other side blamed that side. And
no, we just picked a side and just jumped right in.
And then buried it.
Right.
And forgot all about who did what to who.
Exactly.
And I think maybe stepping back and looking at it for a minute. And just seeing what direction it's going, figuring out who our allies are. Because we're really quick to say they're our allies, and then 20 years later, they're not our allies anymore.
Right. What was it, the Mujahideen?
Oh, you just mentioned Osama bin Laden. He was our ally.
Right, he was.
He was our ally.
He was our ally in Afghanistan before he decided to be our enemy.
Exactly. So we keep arming the wrong people. We keep spending our money in the wrong places. Again, our efforts seem to be off target every time.
Yeah.
Every time. And it is, again and again and again, history repeating itself. And the definition of crazy, doing the same thing over and over again, getting the same results.
Exactly. Expecting a different result.
Yeah.
And I will say, just kind of wrapping that all up, is that Russia is making a similar mistake that we've made.
Let them make it.
Let them make it. Let them, with their more antiquated military, make that mistake. Let them own that baby.
Just pull our guys out. Just pull our guys out. Let Russia make those mistakes. Let Putin eat his words.
They're not. There's this idea in the politicians are putting forward this idea that Putin is gaining some advantage in the Middle East. There's no advantage in the Middle East right now.
Well, whatever advantage he's going to gain is the same one he's had. Being friends with Iran and Syria. But that doesn't really get him that much.
Not what he thinks it does.
No. In fact, it's more like adopting a redheaded stepchild. Like, he's just going to end up supplying his problem children.
Right.
Constantly. And that's a lot better than us spending our money on Russia's problem children.
I agree.
I don't want to support Russia's bad kids.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, two topics that kind of coincide because they're themes. So,
and by the way, guys, if you're watching, we know this is brand new. This is our first show. But if you are watching, if you have something to say, please leave it down in the comments. We're going to be checking. We'll get back with you guys. Make sure that if you're interested, that you subscribe. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Because that way we can know that we're actually touching on things that you guys are interested in. And tell us in the comments whether you agree with us, disagree with us, start a conversation. If there are topics that we haven't covered that you want to cover, put it down there. We might just talk about it.
Exactly. You can also hit us on Twitter. I'm at St. Riffraff.
And I'm at Fred Swann.
That's an easy one.
Yep.
That's an easy one. All right, what are we going to talk about next?
All right, so last thing we want to talk about is Stephen Hawking is a socialist. He's a socialist. He's a pinko commie who hates capitalism and apparently all things that are good.
But we're all socialists. I mean, that's one thing, and I know this is a little bit off topic, but that's one thing about Bernie Sanders calling himself a socialist and people attacking that.
Right.
We're all socialists. We all pay for roads. We all pay for, it's in Social Security.
Right.
We're all a little bit socialized. We all have agreed that there are things that we're willing to pay as a collective to make life easier for everybody, also as a collective.
That being said, this article doesn't talk about that at all.
Not at all.
And yet the title makes you think that he's ready to hand out copies of Das Kapital,
Yeah, more frightened of capitalism than robots.
Right. So...
And while I agree with what Stephen Hawking actually says, I disagree with the actual title because I'm more afraid of robots than capitalism. Mm-hmm. Even though I'm afraid of capitalism, especially when it starts entangling in with robots.
I think that capitalism, just like anything else, is good in moderation. I think the way I view capitalism is it's like a fission nuclear reaction.
Well,
it can be used to be beneficial, but once it gets out of control, it is disastrous.
And I think that just like anything else that grows, it has to evolve. Mm-hmm. It has to move forward in a way that fits the populace, in a way that fits every voter or every citizen. Because if you don't do that, people are going to get left out. And I've told you before that I'm a big world conservative, right. A big picture conservative. And once you have people falling out, that's money that you have to shell out in different directions, which just creates a bigger government, creates more taxes, mm-hmm. and it's almost anti-conservative.
Sure.
To let people fall off. Like if you got rid of Medicare, Medicaid, you'd have people without any health support dying in their houses, and it costs more to clean that up than it would to collectively pay for everything and give everybody preventative health care.
Right, and that was one of the big things about the Affordable Care Act. People were all up in arms about the Affordable Care Act, and I'm okay with the Affordable Care Act.
It doesn't go far enough for me.
I wasn't terribly happy with it, but it's a step in the right direction as opposed to the wrong direction. But one of the things it got rid of was the free rider problem. ERs have to provide stabilizing care for individuals. Yes. They don't have to make them well; they just have to make them stable, and they can push them out.
That was under Ronald Reagan. He's the one that pushed that through.
Right, and so what that ends up doing, ER care is much more costly than a visit to your general
for preventative
doctor,
maintenance for a physical
than your primary care physician. And what that does is it lowers the cost, bends the cost curve somewhat. Just that one thing. Now, there are lots of different things about the Affordable Care Act.
That one thing changes the cost cost per care a lot, though, because hospitals weren't getting the money from that ER care. They had to do it because it was the law.
Right.
So in order to offset the cost, they were having to basically give up their loss. They were hiking prices of other things. I remember it was even before the ACA came out, people were complaining that one Tylenol was like $60 when they went to the hospital, and that's mm-hmm. part of that offset of costs. Is that one gauze pad is $30 and the Tylenol is this much.
And see, that's a federal mandate that actually has local repercussions. I will say here in Macon Bibb, we give our local hospital $500,000 to help offset some of their costs.
Yep. I mean, have you ever seen the Dempsey Hotel on the weekends? Mm-hmm. There's an ambulance there 3 times a night.
Right.
And some of it, I've heard some of it's because people get to stay at the hospital, which is a little bit nicer than the Dempsey,
right,
and get a free meal out of it.
Right. But kind of back on to Stephen Hawking. Do you want to actually read his quote?
Let me see if I can pull it up here.
See if you can pull it up. Because I think that he wasn't saying what the article said he was.
Let's see. Is this him? Yeah. The risk with artificial intelligence isn't malice, but competence. He went on to say, likely to be either the best or worst thing ever to happen to humanity. So there's a huge value in getting it right.
Exactly.
I didn't read capitalism anywhere in there.
Nowhere. And he goes on later on to talk about, essentially, an AI would be so good at production at very low cost that they will outcompete humanity on manufacturing and whatnot. And so you have to be careful how you are setting up that system.
This system forces capitalism to change.
Has to.
It forces it to change because you got to think... People on the far right that are all bootstraps and just go out and get a job. If your job doesn't pay enough, quit and get another job. That far side isn't realizing that Walmart's already started this initiative. Mm-hmm. We talked off camera about the self-checkout lanes, where it takes one person to operate 4 lanes rather than the classic model of 1 per lane.
Right.
And that's expanding.
Yep.
At some point, there's not going to be 1 per lane. It'll be 1 per 8 lanes. Mm-hmm. And the smarter our technology gets and the faster it gets, we're going to see more and more jobs lost.
And another thing that it brings up is manufacturing. Think about a manufacturer right now. A lot of manufacturers use robots for a lot of their building. Think about an AI that can run an entire manufacturing plant. Well, it can run everything. I mean, we're not talking about separate AIs for different robots like you have different workers. We're talking about one AI that is moving a worker robot the way you move your finger. And those are essentially the fingers and toes of the machine. So one plant now is putting out cars, and that requires what? A manager and a few technicians to run one plant. Yeah. And so the corporation is bringing in the money. They may take down the cost somewhat, but really costs are supply and demand. They're not really based on cost.
I think with a model like this, they're going to have to decrease the cost because nobody's going to have a job in order to buy their product.
That's going to be why those economic models are going to have to shift. And that's what Hawking's talking about.
Yes.
He's not saying capitalism is bad or he's afraid of capitalism. He's saying that we need to rethink, how are we going to think, because we're not really thinking about it, how are we going to implement artificial intelligence when it matures, and B, how is that going to impact our economic and social structures, and how are we going to actually deal with that?
And we need to prepare for this sooner than later, because again, AI is a lot further off than just the automation that we're witnessing right now.
Sure. True, general AI. Now, there is narrow AI. If you've ever been on Facebook and clicked the link and then went back to Facebook, you'll notice that 5 different articles related to that thing pop up. And sometimes it gives you a refutation. So that's an AI. There's a narrow AI behind that, driving that. So it's here now in a very narrow sense. So it's coming whether you like it or not.
Exactly.
And all he's saying is we need to think through those things and consciously design the society we want to have.
Exactly. And Stephen Hawking's, I don't know if you guys know, pretty smart guy. Pretty smart guy. I tend to agree with a lot of the things he says because, well, he's a lot smarter than I am.
And, honestly, he's not an economist. He is an astrophysicist, but I would guarantee that he's thinking through these issues a lot more than a lot of our economists are.
Absolutely. So do we have anything else?
I think that's it.
That's it. All right. Once again, leave us a comment down below. If you want us to look at a story that you're interested in, let us know, and we're going to try our best to get back to you down in the comment section.
Absolutely. If you like what you saw here, please give us a like on this video. Please subscribe to the channel. There's a lot of content will be on here. There's other content on the channel. And, share us because we're new, we're growing, and you can be on the ground floor. Say, I knew them before they were famous.
Oh, you damn hipster. All right, guys. Thanks for watching.